So a very warm welcome to this session on how to communicate effectively. And what I would love to know, first of all, is if you were to rate yourselves out of 10, what would you give yourself in terms of being an effective communicator? Again, come and talk to us or put this in the chat. It's a difficult one. Okay, brilliant, lovely. Number 7. Eight. Super. And it's interesting. Thank you, Eileen. 8. Brilliant. I think it's always interesting, you know, where, oh dear, I've got a fire alarm going off now. Sorry. Sorry, there is a fire alarm going off, so I'm hoping it's just a test. I think it's just a test, so we're okay. So yes, one of the things absolutely that I come across, no matter where I go, who I visit, is communication tends to be a really big issue. You know, making sure that communication is effective, and it's what today, the whole session today, is really enable you to go through and hopefully have a little bit of thoughts and observations as far as communication is concerned. Could I have the next slide, please? So I wanted to start with this because I don't know if anybody knows Brené Brown, but she is, you know, she's definitely somebody who I admire. And she says vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. And what I'm saying here is that you absolutely need to be authentic. You can't wear, if you want to communicate effectively, you can't wear a facade. You have to be you. And it's finding out how you can show up being yourself in a way that feels authentic to you, that you know. And I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts or comments on that. Is that something that you think to yourself, yeah, that resonates, or no, not sure I can be that authentic in my workplace? Please do come and chat or put it in the chat. No, and it isn't easy, is it? Yeah. And it does depend on the context, in the context, and it depends who with. And I think there's this wider narrative that you have to put on a facade as a leader of a business, or as a team, you have to put on this facade, and that's just not the case. If you want to get the best out of people and communicate with them effectively, you absolutely have to. I'm hoping that you can see me. Sorry, it disappeared then for a moment. I hope that this is absolutely key to the whole process, is turning up as yourself, being authentic, and you know, you don't have all the answers as a leader, and getting people to realize that you don't have all the answers, and giving that authenticity as part of your leadership role is really key. And you know what, when you do that, people will start to open up with you, because this is about building rapport and it's about building connections within your team. So if you don't actually start being your authentic self, then that's really difficult. Anybody got any thoughts or comments on that? I'm getting a terrible echo back there. Anybody got any thoughts or comments on that? And, you know, this requires you to be brave. The next time you show up is actually saying to your team or saying to the people that you work with, we need to start afresh. We need to have a different way of working. So let's all, you know, it's going to start with me. It's going to be me who's going to be the one who's vulnerable. So I'm going to put myself out there first. And only then can you really start to build those connections. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, I am going to go through why values are so important, because again, this actually goes back to you connecting with people. So another lady called Amy Cuddy, she has done a lot of research on human psychology and how we actually form those connections with each other. And when you meet somebody for the first time, and we all do this, and there's nothing we can do about it, it is in our very subconscious brain, in our primal, our old brain that has evolved over many, many thousands of years. So when we first meet somebody, we actually ask ourselves, ask of that other person, do I trust you and do I respect you? And the reason why we ask those questions is, do I trust you in terms of, this goes back to caveman times, do I trust this person not to do me harm? So again, that's really is the important connection. And the respect side is, do I respect this person? Because can this person be able to reward me or show me some skills, etc., that I can actually take with me and use? So this is about building that trust and respect. And the way that you can do that is actually being very clear with your values, getting people to understand where you are from a values perspective. And that really provides, when you're talking about communication, it really provides that ability for people to know who you are at your core, because when you have your values, this is something that you can't, you know, your values are your moral compass. It's the way that you live your life on a day-to-day basis. So those values are absolutely essential for you to connect with people, but also for people to understand who you are. Has anybody got any questions on that? And my advice would be is really understand, really come up with your values and who you are as a person. Keep talking about them with the people within your teams or your wider network, but also understand what their values are as well, because when you start talking about values, you start to connect with people on a real, on that base, that trust and respect level. Could I have the next slide, please? So do you want to just put all, there's like quite a few things coming on, so I'll just tell you, there's the animation, so I'll just put them all on. Just click through them. So I'll talk through, I think there's 2 more. Yeah, super. So again, communication starts with you. It starts with who you are as a person, because how you show up and how you communicate will really make a difference to what the reaction is, whoever you're communicating with. So I'll just go through, this is the zookeeper model. It's about psychometrics, but really understanding who you are at your core. So if you're a lion is the sort of person who is very active in the way that they're very commanding, they're very action driven, so they're really strong characters. But sometimes what they perhaps lack is a little bit of empathy and a little bit of those real people skills. So that can be an issue. And again, this is all about self-awareness. This is not about judging others. It's just you being aware of who you are and how you show up. The monkey, they're the type of people who are really extrovert. So they're very sociable, real people. However, what they don't do is perhaps they don't do the details. So they don't really, the way that you communicate with them is not by providing lots of detail. With the dolphins, they are people. So they're really about harmonizing. They're about working together as a team. It's about having that sense of belonging. But again, they really don't like conflict. So again, if you're communicating with them, how is your communication style showing up on that day-to-day basis? And then you've got the elephant, and the elephant, they're very steady, they're real completed finishers, they're real task focused. So they're the people that really like the detail. And of course, this is really important when you're talking about communication, because when you're talking about communication, what could possibly go wrong between a lion and a dolphin? You know, they are poles apart in their communication style. So when you're in front of somebody, how do you actually know who you are speaking to? And how do you know that how you are coming across as a person, which is really important. That's why authenticity is so important. So you've got the lions and the elephants. They're very much task focused, so they like the task. Wherever you've got the monkeys and the dolphins, they're very much about people. The extroverts amongst you will be the lions and the monkeys, whereas the introverts tend to be the elephants and the dolphins. And realistically, we probably have 2 or 3 strands of those. So we're not going to be a completely dominant style. We will have those dominant ways of communicating with people. But as I say, this is about understanding who you are and how you show up, and understanding who the person is in front of you and how their communication differs from yours, and what can you actually do to enable you to communicate better. And we will go through how you do that a little bit later. So next slide, please. So we're going to now go on to judgments and biases. Now, we all have judgments and we all have biases. This is about recognizing what your judgments and biases are. For me, I was born in the 60s, raised in the 70s, and I still have unconscious bias that I try very, very hard to not show, but it still crops up. So, you know, I grew up where most doctors were male doctors, and most dentists were male dentists. And even now, when I hear the word or somebody's talking about a doctor or a dentist, I still have this image of a male there, and sometimes it really frustrates me, but that is my unconscious bias really coming to the fore there. So really thinking about, who have you got? How do you actually show up, and what sort of judgments and biases are? Recognizing that those judgments and biases will be there, understanding that, okay, I'm recognizing when you're actually thinking them, I've just judged, I've just had a bias, and I recognize that. Anybody got any thoughts or questions on that? Anybody recognize that that's something that happens? Do you find that it happens within teams? And it's this language that people use, you know, it's, oh, well, they're young, or, oh, they're old. And it's these generalizations that can cause a lot of damage, because we actually are all unique and we all need that separate type of communication that is individually tailored to us. Does that seem about right? I would love to know, what's your biggest challenge in terms of communication? What are you struggling with? Okay, put in the chat. What's your biggest challenge? Very quiet out there. Trying to make this as interactive as possible so you get the most from it. Absolutely, Tracy. Hit the nail on the head. You need to feel safe to be authentic. Okay, talking to people about change. We have a great session on that. Managing change is really difficult. Yeah, for other people to be able to express themselves. And there is always a reason why people don't express themselves. And again, we'll come on to introversion and extroversion, but it's getting that whole inclusiveness as part of it. Difficult conversations. Again, difficult conversations. This is about providing you with the confidence to actually have those difficult conversations. And the more prepared that you can be in order to have those conversations, the better. Balancing assertiveness and sensitivity, yeah, because at the end of the day, you've got to get a job done. So how do you do that? And I think the way that you can do that, hopefully by the end of today, you will get a little bit of a sense of how you can do that, because you can do that compassionately. Yeah, feedback is a gift. Absolutely, Fitri. That's definitely, it is a gift, but people do take it personally, and they do, but it's having that, I suppose, it's that culture. And you can only do that, I think, if you get the only way that it can be that positive way is if you take the feedback first. So if you first, if you're trying to do 360 feedback and you want to be implemented within your teams, you put yourself out there first. Is all I would say. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? Thank you very much for those. Really helps me to understand where you are. And the next slide, please. So this is obviously a very famous quote by Maya Angelou. You know, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And when you communicate well, you actually leave people with a feeling that is positive when you communicate well. Could I have the next slide, please? So I have just been working on how to be an influential and effective leader. And part of that is a book called How to Win Friends and Influence. Has anybody read that? Dale Carnegie, he's a very famous person. But I thought I'll just pick out some of the key points from that. So when you're trying to build rapport with somebody and you're trying to build those connections, it's really important to remember some key areas here. So absolutely become genuinely interested in other people. And this can be difficult because quite often time is critical and you don't have that much time to do that. But you need to show genuine interest in other people. And people will understand, will absolutely know if you're feigning that interest. They just think, you know, this person is feigning interest. Second one is absolutely smile. The more you smile, the better it is. The more you will connect with people on every level. So smiling is really important. And remember somebody's name. It is, you know, when you remember somebody's name, and that's really difficult. I'm terrible at it. It's a skill that I really need to work on, but it's remembering that person's name and using that person's name when you are having a conversation with them. Next one is absolutely be a good listener, which we're going to go through when we're looking at building rapport. And definitely find out about them, find out about what, talk about their interests when you are trying to build those connections. Could I have the next slide, please? So again, there's quite a few, so put them all on, and it's not, I can go through them once they're all on the screen. Thank you. So I've just not been able to go through this. So building rapport, and I'm going to use on the left-hand side, you've got the attending, understanding, empathizing, helping, and that's from the Michael West book on compassionate leadership. And then on the other side is you've got your building rapport. And I'm going to start with the Michael West 4 strands that he uses around compassionate leadership. And I'm going to give you some examples. So the first one is attending. And attending means really, really listening to the other person. And what happens is when you are having a one-to-one or when you're trying to build connections, what we tend to do is when we're listening is that we're not actually listening fully. We're actually listening and perhaps thinking about the question that we're about to ask. And that's not active listening. So active listening is a real skill that needs to be worked on. And what I would absolutely suggest is that you try it on family and friends first and just see if you can actually notice the difference between them. So when somebody comes to you with an issue, it could be any issue, is really think about how you are attending and actively listening. The next one is understanding. And when I talk about understanding, when Michael West talks about understanding, this is about meeting that person where they are at. And that is quite difficult to do, especially if you've got no particular experience about whatever issue they've got. But really be curious and try and understand their viewpoint. So really think meeting that person where they're at. What are they feeling? How is it affecting them? The next one is empathizing, and the empathizing is about putting yourself in their shoes. How would it feel to you if that was you going through whatever it is that they're going through? And then finally, it's helping. And helping, that people think that you need to, when they hear this, that you need to help them. You need to help them solve their own problems. So whatever it is, they still need to own the problem, whatever it is that they've got, but you can facilitate that support. Anybody got any queries on that, or anybody familiar with Michael Ware's 4 strands? Okay, so now we're going to go on to the building rapport, and there's elements of that building rapport. Absolutely, body language is key. So when you are talking to somebody, really think about, just let it come into your conscious awareness of how you are. What is your body language like? When you're having, perhaps you're having trying to communicate to somebody else, and that's going to be a challenging conversation. So how is your body language? Are you the most important thing is, if you're having that type of conversation, you should be feeling relaxed. And if you need to get that body language aligned by just having 5 minutes, just really deep breathing, getting yourself into the zone to have that conversation, that is something I would highly recommend you do. The next one is about pacing and leading. So when are you going to pace and pick up the pace of that conversation, or when are you going to lead the conversation? When are you going to allow them to lead the conversation? So think about the flow, the ebb and flow of that conversation and that communication, and making sure that it is interactive. You're getting feedback, you're getting that two-way communication. The next is matching and mirroring. And this is something that you can do. Again, this is on a subconscious level, is that when you match and mirror somebody, it means that you are aligned to them and you are moving into rapport with them. And when we're talking about matching and mirroring, it could be that you're sitting opposite somebody and you've both got your legs crossed. And it's noticing how they've got their, or if they've got their legs crossed, for you to then cross your legs. And that subconsciously will build rapport with them. It could be that they've got their legs to the side. Those are the sorts of things that you can do to actually build that rapport. Really subtle cues, but honestly, it makes such a difference. And they won't know that you're doing it. This is within NLP, but they will make a difference. We've just talked about active listening and attending, and definitely active listening is about global listening. It's about really honing in and blocking everything out. Definitely ask open questions and remain curious to the other person. It's really important to keep as curious as possible when you're having those conversations, when you're trying to communicate with people. And then also paraphrase, so when you've heard something, just stop the conversation. If you say, okay, I'm just going to sum up what I think you've just said then. And that will demonstrate to them that you are actively listening to them, but it also gives them the opportunity to correct you if that's not what they said. Anybody got any questions on that? This is actually part of our high performance leadership framework as well. We go through this and we actually go into practice sessions as well. Could I have the next slide, please? So in terms of persuasive techniques, is absolutely, in order to build that trust and respect, use your values to communicate, because that will give people a sense of who you are as a person and what's important to them, but also find out what their values are. Definitely self-awareness. How are you showing up today? If you're thinking to yourself, this is going to be an awful conversation, people will know that. So really think about how you're showing up. Definitely be curious and ask open questions about them, remaining that curious, and then find common ground. So what can you actually do to come up with where, that you're not poles apart? What can you actually do to bring those connections together? And definitely use that compassionate style of attend, understand, empathy, and help as well. Could I have the next slide, please? And I wanted to discuss extroverts and introverts because it's a really interesting phenomenon. If you are naturally an extrovert and quite assertive, that can feel quite intimidating to an introvert who isn't. Also, if you're an introvert, what introverts love is silences. They're very happy to, if you ask a question, to sit in that silent space. But extroverts aren't happy to do that. So when you're having those conversations, is the person in front of you an introvert or extrovert? And who are you, an introvert and extrovert? A little bit of evolutionary psychology is introversion and extroversion is actually an adaptive function. It is, we have adapted, and there's nothing that we can do about it because we can learn a little bit of extroversion and we can learn more introversion, but it is something that is innate within us. So introverts, they lived in the forest. When the food was scarce, they stayed in the forest because they didn't want to venture out. Whereas extroverts, if food was scarce, extroverts adapted, so they would actually go and find other places where food wasn't so scarce. So there's nothing that we can do about it. It's just how we have evolved. Next slide, please. And I'm going to go through understanding perspectives, because again, this is really key. So whenever you've got a situation, and I use a 3 chairs model as far as this is concerned, but you don't need to do that. This is about understanding perspectives from different viewpoints. So if somebody is going through something at the moment and they're coming to you and they're definitely seeing the situation through their own eyes, but getting them to actually see whatever it is, so this is not for you to do this, this is for them to do this, is say, right, okay, I want you to stand in the other person's shoes now, and I want you to go through how this person is feeling. What are their emotions? And this, when they actually talk about this and they start to go through this exercise, it's so powerful because they really they start to understand, oh, right, okay, well, I hadn't thought about that. Oh, yes, it could be because this, and this. And then finally, the third person perspective is really taking an observer view and inviting them to then say, right, okay, seeing it from the first person, the second person perspective, what would your global view be? What would your observer view be? And again, that just gives a completely different perspective on the whole, whatever issue you've got in terms of communication. Anybody got any thoughts or comments on that? Has anybody used that before? The chat. Okay, it's really good if you've got, especially if you've got two team members who are perhaps not communicating well with each other. This is definitely worth a try. Okay, next slide, please. So barriers to communication, which is always an issue, barriers. You know, we have this when, you know, whenever we're communicating, it doesn't matter whether we are communicating via email, communicating face to face, it is definitely the sender who decides on the content. The sender then encodes the message, so they decide on what that message is going to contain. They then transmit the message, the receiver decodes the message, and then the receiver interprets the message. And unfortunately, within that transmission is that you have all the emotions and the culture, the environment, the attitudes, intentions, and desires at that moment in time. And this is when, you know, quite often that perhaps you've had an email, you've sent an email, and you've had a response to that email where you thought, wow, where did that come from? So that's the feedback that you get. And I think, has anybody had that? I think most people have been affected in that way. And I certainly have, unfortunately, received an email like that and decided to respond and regretted responding. Because sometimes you think, maybe I should have just slept on that. Yeah, particularly difficult with emails. And again, so the emails are the worst thing, isn't it? But if you create a culture within your team to say, look, if I'm getting it wrong here, come and chat to me, because I'm not meaning to get it wrong. Just come and chat to me, and we can have a grown-up conversation about what we can actually do about it. Yeah, definitely think about your response before you reply. Could I have the next slide, please? And it's really important to understand that behaviour is communication, and there is absolutely always a reason for the behaviour. And whether that's good behaviour or bad behaviour, there is always a reason for it. And definitely behaviour is communication. And you know, and you can feel it when people walk through the door, what type of mood they're in. And it's saying to people, okay, and being open and honest with each other when they are having, if they're clearly displaying that they're unhappy about something. It's saying, you know, I'm really feeling this. You're sending these quite big vibes here that you're not happy. So people understand. You know, it could be that they actually want a reaction from you. It could be that they have no idea. But unless you ask them, then you're not going to know. Next slide, please. So adapting communication. Again, just keep putting those through. I think there's a few on the top. So this is really important because from your perspective, you only, in your world, you only have your perspective that you can absolutely 100% be sure of how you're feeling and how you feel about certain things. That is from your perspective. And even though I've got I've got young, I've got the middle-aged, I've got the old, I've got the young people here, I've got the neurodiverse, I've got LGBTQ plus, and I've got the whole diversity, the whole EDI as well. Quite often, you're never going to know how that other person feels unless you ask them. And this is really important, is that until you actually speak to the other person and really understand from their perspective, and we're talking about that attending, understanding, empathy, empathizing, helping, you can never assume anything about anyone, because this is about perspectives. This is about everybody's individual life. We all go through it individually. And I know that sounds, well, we should be able to communicate better. We can't. The more that you can actually ask people, the better, in terms of how do you want to be communicated with. So if you're making assumptions for communication with an older person, what do you actually know about the older person? Because you could be making the assumption that they're not very good on the digital side, and they could be absolutely brilliant. Equally middle-aged, you could be making assumptions. Younger people, I've had younger people, what assumptions are you making about a younger person? And what is accurate? What is absolutely accurate? I had a young person say to me, that's probably about a year ago now, a young person saying to me, well, I think young people are more creative than older people. And that is their assumption. That was their assumption, that older people couldn't be creative. But I know that that's not an accurate assumption. But equally, yes, I've been young, but I'm not young now. So what assumptions am I making in terms of communicating with the younger person? Neurodiversity is a really key issue because it's so varied and there is such a vast array of different types of neurodiversity. It's really understanding what are their needs in terms of that communication style. How do they want to receive their emails? You could be thinking that your emails are really, really clear, but for a neurodiverse person, they're not clear at all. So try and speak to them and ask them, help me to understand how best it is for me to communicate with you better as far as that email is concerned. And equally, if you have no perspectives in terms of LGBTQ plus and in terms of diversity, speak to people. Really try and understand what it is that and how they want to be communicated with. Anybody got any questions? Have the next slide, please. So I wanted, because I know it's an issue, if you could put the 3 elements up there, that would be great. Communication across boundaries, it's something that I come across quite a bit. So if you're trying to communicate across, if you're social care, you could be trying to communicate across healthcare. It could be that you're trying to work with multidisciplinary teams. It could be that you're wanting to work with doctors' practices, and you want to communicate better with those people, because you know that if you work together, and I don't know if anybody wants to do that, please do put in the chat if that's something that you want to achieve. But if you want to really build that relationship, that the whole consensus, really, you've got to start with why you're actually building the relationship in the first place. So what's the purpose of that? Why are you trying to build that relationship? But also, why would they want to build the relationship? And be very clear and really try and understand, so you can understand that it would actually help them to build this easier communication between you. The next one is, how will you achieve it? And what steps will you take, and what barriers? This is about having this curious mindset. It's making sure that people remain curious and keep asking questions. We know absolutely that when you collaborate and you share best practice within your locations, great things can happen. It's just getting around the table and understanding those perspectives. And then the next one is, what will you do? What plan are you actually going to put in place to enable you to achieve that initial purpose? Next slide, please. And again, is communication with teams. Really be very clear, again, that what you want to achieve as a team. What would good look like? And how would you know that you've actually got there? So again, put out what steps that you're actually going to take, really unpick any barriers within that team, and what will you do, as in what plan are you actually going to make? And I know one of the ladies you said about managing change. We've got a whole raft of support on managing change, but all I would say, if you're trying to go through a change process, the best thing to do is actually get the innovators and the people who are really have that open mindset, first of all, on any sort of change process. Communicate with them first, because they will become the advocates within the team. Could I have the next slide, please? And there's 3 parts, I think, in that circle of influence. Yeah. Super. Oh, sorry. No. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so circle of influence, I use this all the time. This is, if there's one thing you can take away from today, has anybody used the circle of influence? Anybody used it? Okay, circle of influence is one of the best tools that you can use across your setting, and it doesn't matter, you can use this for in any way, shape or form. So in terms of communicating with people within, so it could be family members. So if you've got a particular situation where family members are perhaps they've got unrealistic expectations of the service. I don't know, that it could be anything, but to go through this circle of influence with them, and for them to understand what's in their scope. And also, at the moment, we have got so many pressures, with funding pressures, certainly with the national insurance that's coming, the levy on that national insurance, that increase. That's massive, and it's going to have a massive impact. When you use the circle of influence, it can really give you a much better and realistic perspective of the bits that you can control within that situation. And also doing it with your teams really does help as well. So when you're trying to build those relationships and you build those better communications, and I'm just going to use the family example at the moment. So if you've got a family and really going through them, what is their circle? What do they feel that's out of their control at the moment? So what is completely, so they can't control the deterioration of their loved one's health if they've got, if they've got a degenerative illness that they're going through. They can't control that. What other things can they not control? It may be that they can't control the fact that they've only got a limited resource to pay for whatever that service is. It could be that. So these are all the things that they can't control. But what they can control in the circle of control is how they react to it. So that's their thoughts, their actions, all of those things they can control. And the areas, what can they influence? Is there anything that they could influence, perhaps other stakeholders? They could perhaps influence, the other care aspects that or other people within the care team. Perhaps they could influence them to provide additional support. So it could be physiotherapy. They could influence them to go and do some visits. Does that help? Does that give you an idea of what you can and can't control? But if you're talking about a team exercise in terms of budget constraints, what can you control within budget constraints? Again, you can control your thoughts and your actions. What you can't control is legislation. What we've just been, what we are discussing is perhaps the circle of influence is how can we get the wider message out there so people truly understand the state of the situation at the moment. What can we do within our circle of influence? If you do this with teams, it actually also provides some real, it gives them the creative space to be able to come up with the solutions that they potentially can put on there. Anybody got any questions on that? Anybody got any questions? I actually use this, just so you know, I use this with my dad. So my dad had a degenerative illness, and he was a very poorly man, and I decided to go because it's great to use with people who are actually struggling and struggling to cope. So he didn't know I was going through this with him. I was just having a conversation with him, as you do. And, I went through, okay, well, what can't you control, Dad? Well, he couldn't control the fact that he was getting worse. That wasn't something he could control. In terms of his circle of influence, I said to him, well, there are, perhaps you could communicate better with the people within the care home. Perhaps there are some things that you could do better as far as that's concerned. And the circle of control, we actually put a plan in place where we actually set out, because he couldn't concentrate on things. So we put a plan in place that he could go through these individual tasks, but always have a backup as to what he could do. So if Sudoku, he decided he didn't want to do Sudoku, then he could get his painting out. If that wasn't working, he could put the TV on. So we just gave him these options. He created it, but it felt just by doing the exercise, he felt he was more in control and he was calmer for it. So again, it really helps from that person perspective as well. Could I have the next slide? I think it's the last slide. And I wanted to go through, and this is the really thinking about what are you aiming for? What will tell you that you've got there in terms of how you actually communicate? So just saying you've put the values in place, you've been authentic, you've really started to build that rapport with people, you started to listen, you started to get that feedback. And then what should happen is that you should start to see a difference. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what that should look, feel, and sound like. So this is from a book by Dr. Henry Cloud. It's called The Power of the Other. And he talks about 4 connections. So the corner one is no connection. The corner one connection is, quite often, sometimes you meet people along the way and you think, I'm never going to have anything in common with them. We're not going to connect in any way, shape or form. So that's the no connection. The corner 2 is the bad connection, and that's really the toxic connection. That's very destructive and not helpful. The corner 3 is the fake connection. And I know so many teams operate in this fake connection, or there is people within those teams that are operating on this fake connection. And the fake connection is when they say to you that everything's fine, but it's not. You know that there's something amiss. They're not being honest with you, or you just haven't connected with them, so they don't feel psychologically safe to do so. And that's the key. And what I would do for those, if you feel that you're in that situation, is talk about the elephants in the room. Talk and have that open conversation and just feel that we're not connecting. And this is what I feel we're going to come on to corner 4 and what that looks like. But this is what I would like it to look like, but I feel that we're not there yet. How can I help us to get there? Okay, so it's having that absolute key conversation with them then. The corner 4 connection is absolutely, this is where when you've got those corner 4 connections, You absolutely know you've got their implicit trust. You trust them implicitly. You know you can rely on them. They can rely on you. You know there's absolutely that connection there, and you feel that connection. So that's what you're aiming for. It's really that corner for connection. And I think that was the last slide. Yes, questions, thoughts and comments. So we've got 10 minutes. Please do feel free now to come on and have a chat. Let's have it. If you've got any particular key questions that you would like answered, or if you think that I've not covered anything there, please do shout out now. We are in a safe space here.